continuing with the theme of how people get into debt is a method that baffles a lot of people. It stuns a lot of people when I tell them, because it seems almost, well, it definitely is counterintuitive, but it seems almost impossible. But I've seen it. Now, this method is rare. I would say we only see it maybe a few times a year, but it's no less real and no less important to discuss. And that is, people will sometimes save their way into debt. How's that possible? So funny enough, the very first client I ever had, I don't know what we're up to now, but it's I'm getting around 1,600 clients, something like that. Sorry, what am I saying? 1,600, 2,600. Wait, I regressed. 2,600 clients or so. We've seen this a few times, and the way someone saves their way into debt is, well, first of all, what I mean by that is there are people who have significant debts, 30,000, 50,000, 100,000 more, but they have assets. Now, most often the asset that's of any significance is a house, and in that case, that's easy for people to wrap their heads around, because you buy a house, maybe you only put a small amount down, but if they've been in that house for any amount of time, especially in the GTA, they probably accumulated a significant amount of equity, and that makes sense. Of course, they're asset rich, cash poor. That makes sense to people. But when I say no, I'm talking investments, people scratch their head like, well, if they have all these investments, how do they have debt? Well, it's very simple. They're not exactly thinking straight. What I mean is, if I think of the very first client I ever saw with this situation, it was the first client I ever had. At first, I couldn't understand how they did this, because when I met them, they had about $60,000 of debt. And not including the house, they had about $30-something thousand of assets. I'd have to check, because I still have the notes, but it was something like $31,000, $32,000 of assets. And by assets, I mean TFSA and RESP. They had money in RRSPs as well, but I wasn't as worried about that, because when we're doing the calculations for what someone should pay in a proposal, the RSP isn't relevant except for the contributions over the last 12 months. So they had a lot in there too. Their assets, if you took the RSP, forget about the house. If you took the RSP, the RESP, and the TFSA, and the cash value of the life insurance, it actually exceeded the $60,000. But they were, the husband in this case was still insolvent. Now, how does that happen? Well, when I spoke with them, I said, you've been putting all this money away, and yet you're accumulating debt. And the first thing they said was, well, yeah, we have to have something. Everyone tells you should contribute to the RSP. That you have kids, you gotta save for their college and their universities. That's the RESP. We'd be crazy not to have life insurance. I agree, you should have life insurance. Which type is debatable. It depends on your situation, what you can afford, in your discipline, the discipline you possess. And we should have the TFSA. Why wouldn't we take advantage of that? What this comes down to was, if you look at their budget, they were getting paid. Okay, the husband and wife both had jobs, and they would get paid. And then first thing they do, well, RSP for him, RSP for her. They both had TFSAs. Money goes there. RESP for one child, RESP for the second child, and then life insurance. And they even had some Canada savings bonds, I remember, and just some stocks in general. So what's going on here? Well, that is savings, but in terms of cash flow, cash is still being used. So in this case, if whatever you make in a month, take off all this money that's being set aside. And this isn't a checking account. This isn't a savings account. This is not liquid assets. The TFSA in their case was mutual funds. This is not money that's easy to access, either to liquidate instantly. I mean, a TFSA mutual funds, you can turn that into cash within 3 days. But RSPs, once the money goes into the RSP, okay, that's great. Your money is saved, but to get the money out is not so simple. You're going to have to fill out some forms, and there's going to be taxes or withholding tax at source. And if not right there, then afterwards, or sometimes both. Sometimes you'll have source that they'll withhold. If you try to take money out of your RSP, they'll withhold 10, 20, 30%. But depending on what bracket you're in and what this remember, if you take money out of an RSP, that's technically income. That could put you into another bracket. You're going to owe some tax right there. So I always tell people, look, it's great to save. It's great to put money away. But remember, if you take $100 and you put that in your RSP, you don't get to spend that money on rent. You don't get to spend that money on your mortgage if you happen to own a house. That's, you don't get to use that 100 to put gas in your car. And if you have the money left over, if you can afford to do that, that's fantastic. It's what you should be doing. Though I always tell people it's still good to have some cash around. You always need some cash. You need to be liquid. You need to be able to pay bills, both expected and unexpected, at any given moment. But what these people were doing was they were putting all this money aside because they were told to do it. And as a result, every month they had a shortfall. They were coming up $400, $500 short on their budget. And their response to this was, well, I guess we don't make enough money, but we got to get by. And so out comes the credit card. Doesn't sound like much, a negative of, a shortfall of $300, $400, $500, $600 a month. Do that for 5 years. Watch what happens. Even if you lose just $200 a month, that's $2,400 a year. 5 years, that's $12,000. $12,000 on credit cards can become 20 very easily. And next thing you know, now what happens when you get there? Well, as soon as the credit cards reach any significant figure, double digits, add 3 zeros to that, you're in the 10,000 range and up. Well, now the payments on the credit card start consuming even more of your income, which means the only way you can get by is to use the credit cards. What should they have done? Because some people say, what do you want them to do? Not save anything? Yeah. Until the budget's in order? Yeah. Savings is just that. Savings is supposed to be what you have left over placed in an instrument that ideally produces more money. You can keep the money in a checking account. You need to keep some there so you have, again, the cash available to you. But any excess you have, ideally, why have it sit around when it can be generating money elsewhere? But if you're losing money every month, that's not savings you're putting away. You're just digging a hole and trying to fill it up with, the dirt that you get out of digging the hole. It's not working. What they should have done, of course, hindsight is 2020, was this is where budgeting comes in handy, because if they looked at their budget, what they would have found was the big hole was really dug when both kids were in daycare. Again, 2 young kids, both parents working, there's daycare costs. And if they had done the budget, they would have noticed, okay, until at least one of the kids is out of daycare and in school, and even then you have before and after school programs, we can't be putting all this money aside. Yes, we want to save for the future, but if we're just creating debt, the savings they're nullified. Because think of it this way as well. When I told them about this, and I was even suggesting, maybe selling the savings bonds, for example, the wife understandably said, but then, but we save that, what are we supposed to do? We're eating up the savings. And I say, look, what are you making on the bonds? 1%? I forget what it was, but remember, this is back when interest rates were, borderline zero. I said, you're making maybe 1% on the bonds. What are the creditors making on you on the credit card? At best, it's, if you're lucky, it's 11.99. In their case, it was probably closer to 19.99. You're not gaining anything. You're not gaining anything at all in that case. So I understand the emotional attachment to this, but we put all our money into this. But at the same time, those bonds were causing you to, that's cash you could have put towards the debt. So what I'm getting at is, in this case, first of all, budgets are important, again, but we tend to do things with our money just because people are telling us to do it. I will guarantee they started the RSP because when they opened up the account at the bank said, hey, you need an RSP. Sounds great, but can you afford it? When I was 18, I was thinking of starting an RSP, and my uncle, the accountant, said, why? And, at the time, what do I know? I'm 18. I said, well, aren't I supposed to start saving for my retirement? And, isn't it good to put money away? And you always see these books, these financial advisors. Oh, Joey started putting his money away at 18 and, he made all this money, whereas Jimmy started at 30 and, the poor schmuck now just has the same amount of money as Joey. What an idiot. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. But my uncle's line of reasoning was, he looked at me and he said, first of all, Zach, you're 18. You trying to defer taxes? All right, what? He said, you're 18. You work a summer job, then you go to school. There's no tax deferral in this case. So, and also he said, do you want to get a car? Well, yeah, I need to get a car. Good, you're going to need money for that. Do you want to be able to do this? Do you want to be able to go on a trip? He said, you're young. You got time. And all these people talking about accruing all this money over time, it's going to grow. He said, you can make up for it when you start making real money. And in his case, he was right. I did not start my RRSP until my late 20s. You know what? I've caught up, because in my late 20s, I was actually making money. And, not summer job money. I was making full-time adult professional money. Okay? So remember, just because the bank says you should do it, the bank's trying to sell you stuff, guys. Okay, how does the bank make money? They make money when you open up an account. They make money when you borrow money, and they make money when you're investing. So just because they say you should do something doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing to do, especially if you have a shortfall every month. Okay, sacrificing a few years so you can make sure you have money to pay the bills and stay out of debt is worth it. Yes, you're giving up 3 years of growth. But if you stay out of debt, you're ahead still. You're doing well. Okay? So moral of the story, I seem to always conclude things with that phrase, but moral of the story, savings are great, investments are great. Make sure you get a good financial advisor, because, most people don't know anything, that present company included. But make sure you can afford to save. Don't go into debt just to put money in a TFSA that's making diddly squat. That's another story. But anyways, have a nice day.